She was forced to marry a cruel, aging man, but the prince would not allow the union to be consummated. The chandeliers of Greystone Manor glowed with a light that seemed determined to disguise the truth of the crumbling estate. Wax from the tall tapers ran in slow rivulets down the silvered arms, the glow flickering against faded frescoes and cracked gilt molding. A musician's bow trembled against the strings of his violin, sending lilting strains of a minuet swirling through the vast ballroom, though the notes could not quite fill the hollow spaces between the guests' conversations. Helena Greycourt stood near the edge of the gathering, her hands clasped tightly before her. The gown she wore, though of costly crimson brocade, betrayed its borrowed nature in the way it gaped slightly at the shoulders and pinched too tightly at the waist. The stays beneath bit into her ribs, making every breath a conscious effort. The neckline, lower than she would have chosen, left her feeling exposed beneath the calculating gazes of the assembled gentry. She had not wanted to attend this ball. Her father, however, had insisted. "Our prospects must be improved," he had said with a strained smile, too brightly delivered to mask his desperation. Helena had obeyed, not understanding why this particular night carried such weight. Now, she watched the sea of powdered wigs and jeweled gowns, the air thick with perfume and unspoken bargains, and wished herself anywhere else. The manor had once been a place of beauty. As a child, Helena had loved to run barefoot along the marble floors, their surfaces gleaming beneath the vast arched windows. Now the curtains hung heavy with dust, and cracks spidered across the ceilings. The staff, reduced in number, worked with what little remained to maintain appearances. But nothing could truly hide the decay, not from the guests, and certainly not from Helena. She moved among them with practiced poise. The daughters of neighboring barons and earls glanced sidelong at her, their words laced with faint amusement or thinly veiled pity. The gentlemen fared no better. A few offered perfunctory bows, their interest swiftly diverted to those with more advantageous dowries. Helena had long since grown accustomed to the subtle rejection, to the knowledge that her family's dwindling fortunes had rendered her more liability than prize. Yet tonight, an undercurrent of something else ran beneath the usual disdain, a sense of expectation she could not quite name. Her father, Baron Greycourt, stood near the dais at the far end of the ballroom. He wore his best coat, though its cuffs were worn and the velvet had faded to a muted brown. His gaze flickered nervously across the crowd, lips pressed into a thin line. Beside him loomed a tall figure Helena had noticed, but not yet approached. A man dressed in somber black velvet embroidered heavily with gold. A sapphire ring gleamed on one gloved hand as he leaned upon a gold-handled cane. His powdered wig framed a long, sallow face that seemed to have been carved from wax. Lord Oswald Farringdon. The name carried weight in the county, whispered with either reverence or distaste. He was a marquis of vast wealth and influence, a man who had survived 2 wives and countless scandals. Helena had met him only once, briefly, at a county gathering where he had regarded her with unsettling interest. Now, that same gaze settled upon her once more. A chill pricked the back of her neck. Helena turned away, forcing herself to appear composed. She could not understand why he was here, or why her father had summoned so many guests when they could ill afford such a display. The music faltered. The musicians, after a whispered word from the master of ceremonies, lowered their instruments. Conversation dwindled into uneasy silence. Helena, caught mid-step near a cluster of courtiers, stilled. Baron Greycourt moved forward, his voice unsteady as it rang through the room. "My lords, my ladies," he began, "it is with great honor and deepest gratitude that I share most joyous news this evening." Helena's breath caught. Her father had said nothing of an announcement. "Through the kindness and generosity of a most esteemed nobleman, my daughter, Helena Greycourt, shall soon be wed to his lordship, the Marquis of Farringdon." For a moment the words did not register. The room swayed around her, colors blurring at the edges of her vision. The murmurs began almost at once, soft gasps, Whispers exchanged behind gloved hands. Her father continued, voice gaining strength. The union will secure the future of Greystone Manor and ensure our family's standing for generations to come. Helena could scarcely breathe. Her gaze locked on Farringdon as he advanced with deliberate steps, the polished soles of his shoes clicking softly against the marble. He stopped before her, eyes pale and predatory. "My lady," he murmured, dipping his head in a semblance of courtly deference. "We are to be most fortunate in our alliance." She stared at him, unable to summon a reply. Her limbs felt as though they belonged to someone else. "You will offer your gratitude to Lord Farringdon," her father said, voice strained but firm. It was not a request. Helena's heart thundered in her chest. Her gaze flicked desperately to her father, who would not meet her eyes. Around them, the assembly watched, some with open curiosity, others with knowing smirks. A few sympathetic glances reached her, but none dared intervene. Helena's throat tightened. She wished to protest, to demand an explanation, but the words refused to come. And in that silence, with the weight of expectation pressing down upon her, there remained only one choice. With trembling legs, she moved forward. The world seemed to tilt, the faces around her blurring into a haze. Mechanically, she sank into a low curtsy before Farringdon, every muscle screaming in defiance. "My lord," she said, her voice barely audible, "I am honored." Farringdon's smile curved with satisfaction, though his eyes remained cold. He reached out, fingers brushing her bare hand in a fleeting touch that made her skin crawl. The guests applauded politely, the sound hollow in her ears. As the gathering resumed its forced gaiety, Helena remained frozen in place, her breath shallow. Her father approached at last, his expression brittle. "You must prepare," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. "You are to depart for Northelm Court at dawn. The engagement must be formalized before the king." "At dawn?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "It is necessary," he replied. "There can be no delays, no interference." Helena's blood ran cold. The trap had been carefully laid, and now the jaws had closed. With the eyes of the court upon her, escape was impossible. The remainder of the evening passed in a haze. Courtiers approached with hollow congratulations. Helena answered with automatic curtsies and empty smiles. Farringdon lingered nearby, a shadow at her side, speaking little but watching her with unrelenting attention. At last, the ball came to its merciful close. Helena fled to her chamber, her mind racing. Within, she found her maid already gathering gowns and personal effects into battered trunks. The girl looked at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Helena crossed to the window, pushing open the pane. The cool night air stung her cheeks, but it could not clear the dread pressing against her ribs. Below, in the shadowed courtyard, a carriage waited, its black form gleaming faintly beneath the moonlight. 4 horses stamped and tossed their heads in the silence. The trunks were nearly packed. The hour of departure crept closer with each tick of the clock. Helena stood alone in the flickering candlelight, her gaze fixed upon the looming carriage. There was no escape now. Only the unknown awaited. The journey to Northelm Court dragged through 2 endless days of jolting discomfort and bone-deep fatigue. Helena sat in the corner of the carriage, her body swaying with each rut and turn of the road. The trunks that had been hastily packed at Greystone Manor now pressed against her feet, their battered leather corners digging into her ankles. Opposite her sat Lady Ashcombe, a tall, thin woman of middle years whose sharp features and stiff posture suggested a life of unyielding propriety. Lady Ashcombe was an old ally of Lord Farringdon and had assumed the role of Helena's chaperone without pretense. Throughout the journey, her words were few but laden with subtle warning. Any attempt at conversation had been met with cool, clipped responses. The countryside rushed past the narrow windows, but Helena scarcely noticed the fields and woods of her childhood fading behind her. She could think only of what awaited her ahead. The isolation of the carriage felt suffocating, every hour another reminder of how swiftly her life had been upended. At intervals they stopped at roadside inns, but Helena was not allowed to stray from Lady Ashcombe's watchful presence. Even meals were eaten in private rooms, guarded by servants in Farringdon's livery. By the time the towers of Northelm Court rose against the grey sky, Helena felt numb with exhaustion. The sprawling palace loomed above the city like a stone leviathan, its white marble facades glistening faintly beneath a thin drizzle. Rows of carriages lined the wide drive, their liveried drivers hunched beneath dripping hats. Footmen bustled about, unloading trunks, guiding guests, and receiving curt instructions from the royal stewards. The carriage rolled to a stop beneath an arched portico. Lady Ashcombe descended first, her movements swift and assured. Helena followed, the damp air biting through her travel-stained gown. The vast courtyard teemed with activity, but to Helena it felt cold and alien. Without ceremony, Lady Ashcombe led her through towering doors into the palace's great entrance hall. Light from countless chandeliers reflected off marble floors and gilded columns. Courtiers drifted in small, glittering groups, their low voices merging into a constant murmur. The scent of beeswax and crushed lavender hung heavy in the air. Helena's gaze swept upward. The vaulted ceiling seemed impossibly high, painted with mythic scenes of triumph and virtue, images at stark odds with her own growing despair. "This way," Lady Ashcombe instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. They ascended a grand staircase lined with carved balustrades, the rustle of Helena's skirts echoing in the vast space. At the second floor, a pair of heavy oak doors were opened by two silent footmen. Beyond lay a series of rooms, richly appointed but impersonal. Tapestries depicting ancient battles adorned the walls. A fire burned low in the hearth. "These will be your quarters for the duration of your stay," Lady Ashcombe said. "You are to remain here except when summoned. It is imperative that no confusion or distraction arises at this stage." Helena stiffened. "Am I a prisoner now?" Lady Ashcombe's lips twitched, though not in amusement. "You are here under the protection of Lord Farringdon's arrangements. It would be wise to conduct yourself accordingly." With that, she swept from the room, leaving Helena standing amid the unfamiliar splendor. The day passed in a haze of restless pacing and unanswered questions. A maid arrived with refreshments, her eyes downcast, offering no conversation. The hours stretched unbearably long, the distant sounds of the bustling court reminding Helena that the world outside her chamber continued without her. As dusk approached, Lady Ashcombe returned. "You will attend the king this evening," she announced. "There is to be a formal dinner. Prepare yourself." A fresh gown had been laid across the bed, pale silver with ivory lace, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar. With the help of the maid, Helena dressed in silence. Her hair was pinned in an intricate style that tugged painfully at her scalp. A thin sheen of powder was dusted over her skin, and a modest string of pearls was clasped around her throat. By the time she was led through the palace corridors toward the grand dining hall, her heart pounded beneath her corset. The hall itself was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cascaded light over long tables draped in damask and set with gold-rimmed china. The courtiers already present glittered like a living tapestry, velvet, satin, and jewels in every hue. At the raised table sat King George I, his heavy crown gleaming beneath the candlelight. Helena's entrance was announced with practiced indifference. She curtsied deeply before the king, her knees trembling. "Your Majesty." The king regarded her with cool detachment, then nodded. She was escorted to her seat farther down the table, well within view of the royal dais, but far from its power. Lady Ashcombe seated herself nearby, a silent sentinel. As the meal commenced, Helena could scarcely eat. The clatter of silverware, the hum of polite conversation, the occasional burst of forced laughter, all seemed to press upon her. Halfway through the first course, disaster struck. Reaching for her goblet, Helena's gloved hand brushed the stem too roughly. The goblet tipped, sending a cascade of wine across the tablecloth. In her flustered attempt to right it, her glove slipped from her hand, falling to the floor beside her chair. Before she could react, a gloved hand retrieved it. Helena looked up and met the gaze of Prince Arthur. He was taller than she had remembered, dressed in emerald velvet that caught the light with every movement. His dark hair was tied neatly at the nape of his neck, his features composed yet striking. For a moment, the noise of the room seemed to fade. Their eyes locked. Helena felt her breath catch. Without a word, he extended the glove. His fingers brushed hers, a brief, electric contact that sent a ripple of awareness through her. "Your glove, my lady," he said quietly. Helena swallowed. "Thank you, Your Highness." The moment was fleeting, yet it lingered as he returned to his seat. Helena's pulse fluttered beneath her skin. She could not understand why such a simple gesture should unsettle her so deeply. The remainder of the meal passed in a blur. Helena remained acutely aware of the prince's presence, though neither of them looked again in the other's direction. The subtle tension coiled within her, impossible to dismiss. When at last the dinner ended, Helena was escorted back to her quarters. Alone in her room, she paced restlessly, her thoughts tangled. The prince's brief touch haunted her more than she wished to admit. The next day brought no respite. The court prepared for a grand dance that evening, a gathering designed to foster alliances and display favor. Lady Ashcombe again supervised Helena's preparation, her manner brisk. "You will dance when called upon," she instructed, "and you will remain circumspect." Helena said nothing. The gown selected for her was a soft blue, the bodice cut to flatter but not reveal. Her hair was arranged with delicate braids woven through the curls. When she entered the ballroom, the sea of faces and finery threatened to overwhelm her. Music swelled from the gallery as couples took their places. Helena moved with practiced grace, though her heart was not in it. She had no desire to play the part assigned to her. When her name was called for the next set, she forced herself forward. Her partner was announced, Prince Arthur. The dance began with formal steps and measured turns. Helena met his gaze only briefly, but what she saw unsettled her. A flicker of understanding, of recognition beneath the surface. "You are far from home, Lady Helena," Arthur said softly as they passed one another. "So it would seem, Your Highness." The movements of the dance carried them apart, then together again. "It is not my place," he continued, voice low enough that only she could hear. "But I hope you know you are not as alone here as you may feel." Helena's composure wavered for an instant. The prince's words were carefully chosen, yet their meaning was unmistakable. "I thank you for your kindness," she replied, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her throat. The set concluded, and they parted with formal bows. Yet the echo of the prince's words remained with her long after. That night, unable to sleep, Helena wandered the dim corridors near her chambers. The palace was quieter now, the grand spaces abandoned to shadows. Turning a corner near a servant's passage, she paused as voices reached her ears. "Must move quickly," a low voice said. "The prince's interest is growing. We cannot risk delay." Helena recognized the speaker at once, Farrington. Another voice responded, sharp with urgency. "Then it will be done within days. A private ceremony. No further obstacles." Helena's breath caught. The words chilled her to the bone. Her time was running out. The days that followed blurred into a tense rhythm of hollow courtesies and watchful silences. Each morning, Helena awoke with a weight pressing against her chest, the memory of that overheard conversation haunting every moment. Farrington meant to force her into marriage, soon. The certainty of it seeped into her bones. Lady Ashcombe's presence grew more constant, her manner tighter, as though she too sensed Helena's increasing unrest. But Helena masked her dread behind practiced composure. She could not afford weakness, not here. What she had not expected, what unsettled her most, was the subtle change in Prince Arthur's manner. At first, Helena thought she imagined it. A glance held longer than decorum required. A fleeting smile meant only for her amid the sea of impassive faces. He would appear in the periphery of gatherings where she had not expected him, always at a polite distance. But his gaze remained steady when it met hers, as if to remind her, "I see you." On the third morning, Helena was escorted to a modest breakfast in one of the lesser halls. The room overlooked the south gardens, a space usually reserved for strolling when the weather permitted. As she sat alone at the table, listlessly stirring her tea, a footman approached with a quiet message. "His Highness Prince Arthur requests the pleasure of a brief conversation in the palace gardens, should it please you, my lady." Helena's heart jolted. Lady Ashcombe's hawk-like gaze sharpened. "She is unwell this morning." "I feel well enough to walk," Helena said evenly, lifting her chin, a calculated risk. "Fresh air may do me good." Lady Ashcombe's mouth thinned, but she could not openly defy the prince's request. Moments later, Helena found herself moving through the palace's lower corridors, her slippered steps muffled against the stone. The sun had broken through the morning clouds, casting a pale light over the gardens. Dew clung to the leaves and petals, sparkling like scattered gems. Arthur awaited her beneath an arched trellis, heavy with early blooming roses. His attire was unostentatious, a dark green coat over a cream waistcoat, his hair bound neatly. He inclined his head as she approached. "My lady." His voice was quiet, intimate beneath the distant hum of court life. "Your Highness." Helena kept her voice calm, though her pulse raced. "Would you permit me to accompany you?" He extended an arm, a gesture of courtly propriety, yet Helena sensed the deeper intent beneath it. "I would be honored," she replied, her fingers brushing the fine cloth of his sleeve as she took it. They began to walk in measured steps along the gravel path, their movements synchronized with the ease of shared understanding. For several moments, neither spoke. The air between them shimmered with unspoken words. "I am aware," Arthur said at last, his tone deliberately casual, "that certain arrangements are being hastened concerning your future." Helena's breath caught. She cast him a glance, searching his face. "You know." His gaze remained forward, but his fingers flexed slightly beneath her touch. "I know more than I wish, and I regret the position in which you have been placed." "Regret will not stop it," she whispered, the words escaping before she could rein them in. "No," Arthur agreed. "But awareness may yet offer a means to resist." Helena swallowed hard, struggling to maintain her composure. "I fear there is no resistance left to me." "There is always resistance," Arthur said softly. He halted, guiding her to face him beneath the flowering arch. Sunlight dappled his features, illuminating the steady fire in his eyes. "Though I must be cautious in how I offer it. You would risk yourself for me." Her voice trembled. He held her gaze. "It is not risk I consider. It is conscience." Helena's resolve faltered beneath the warmth of his presence. How easily he unraveled the walls she had built around her heart. For a moment, standing so close beneath the sunlit leaves, the world narrowed to the space between them. Yet they both knew the limits imposed upon them. Helena forced herself to step back. "I must return," she said softly. "Lady Ashcombe will already suspect." Arthur inclined his head, though his gaze lingered. "Should you require aid, Lady Helena, I ask only that you trust me enough to seek it." Her throat tightened. "I do." The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass. From that moment, the pattern of her days shifted. Arthur continued to arrange brief, seemingly accidental encounters. During a stroll through the library wing, at the edges of crowded gatherings. Each time, Helena felt her strength renewed by his quiet support. Yet with each passing day, Farrington's shadow loomed larger. He grew possessive, summoning her more frequently to his side during court functions. His touch lingered on her arm a moment too long. His gaze, once coldly entitled, now burned with suspicion. Helena sensed his growing awareness of Arthur's interest. Lady Ashcombe's watch deepened in response. Helena was no longer permitted solitary walks, and even in her quarters, A servant was always present under pretense of attendance. Then came the rumors. Whispers drifted through the corridors, carried on the perfumed air of the court. Lady Helena, they said, had caught the eye of the prince. Some claimed she sought to manipulate his favor to avoid her betrothal. Others implied worse. Helena heard them all, each word another stone upon her weary heart. At a formal reception that evening, Helena stood near the edge of the great hall, her presence required but barely tolerated by the court's glittering elite. Farrington approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You court danger, my dear," he murmured, his voice a silken threat. "His Highness may find his duties elsewhere soon enough. You would be wise to remember your place." Helena met his gaze with as much steel as she could muster. "I remember it well, my lord." "See that you do." His fingers grazed her wrist, cold as iron. She pulled away with quiet defiance. Meanwhile, Arthur found himself under similar pressure. The king's advisers, ever watchful of the delicate political balances at court, issued subtle warnings. "Northelm cannot afford disruption, Highness," one reminded him during a private council. "The Marquess is a valued ally. Public interference would be most unfortunate." Arthur offered no reply, but his jaw tightened. The weight of duty pressed heavily upon him, yet his heart would not release its claim. That night, he sought counsel with one of his most trusted courtiers, Lord Pembroke, a man whose loyalty to Arthur was unquestioned. "There is no more time," Arthur confided. "If Farrington proceeds as planned, the choice will be removed from her entirely. You must tread carefully," Pembroke warned, "but if you are to act, it must be now." It was Pembroke who brought him the final piece of news, confirmation that chilled Arthur's blood. "Farrington has obtained special dispensation," Pembroke said. "The marriage is to be conducted in private, away from the king's eye. Tomorrow, in the secluded chapel on the east grounds." Arthur rose to his feet, his decision made. There would be no more hesitation. He strode from the chamber, each step swift and resolute, the corridors of Northelm Court unfolding before him like a gauntlet yet to be run. The pale light of dawn had barely broken through the heavy clouds hanging over Northelm Court when Helena's chamber door opened with a swift, controlled motion. Lady Ashcombe entered, her thin lips pressed together in grim satisfaction. "It is time," she announced curtly. "You are to be dressed and prepared at once." Helena, already awake after a sleepless night, rose from her seat by the window. The silk gown laid across her bed gleamed in the dim light, a deep crimson creation, striking and ominous. It seemed a costume meant for an occasion she could not bear to face. Two maids entered and began their work without delay, hands moving deftly through her hair and along the fastenings of the gown. Helena's body moved with them, but her mind remained locked on the conversation she had overheard days before. There had been no escape. Each hour since had only drawn her closer to the moment when her freedom would be sealed away. When the last pin was secured and the final strand of hair smoothed into place, Lady Ashcombe regarded her with a sharp eye. "You will behave with dignity," she said, voice low. "And you will not disgrace your family." Helena made no reply. Her pulse hammered beneath her skin, her breath shallow beneath the tight corset. She could not allow herself to surrender to fear. Not now. As Lady Ashcombe turned toward the door, it opened again, this time with a sudden, deliberate force that startled both women. Prince Arthur stood in the doorway. His eyes, dark with determination, swept over the scene before fixing on Helena. "Lady Ashcombe," he said with cool formality, "I must speak with Lady Helena. Alone." Lady Ashcombe's composure faltered for the briefest instant. "Your Highness, this is highly improper." "The lady is required at the chapel." "She will not go there until I have spoken with her," Arthur said, his voice edged with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with a stiff bow and a glance laden with warning, Lady Ashcombe swept from the room, closing the door behind her. Arthur crossed the chamber in 3 strides, his gaze never leaving Helena's. "You must not do this," he said, voice low but charged with emotion. "I will not permit it." Helena's breath caught. "I have no choice. The ceremony will not happen," Arthur interrupted. "Not as they intend, not without your true consent." She stared at him, struggling to anchor herself amid the rush of conflicting emotions. His presence filled the room, solid and unwavering. Yet beneath his calm, she sensed the same urgency that gripped her own heart. "You cannot stop them," she whispered. "I can," he said, softer now, yet no less certain. "If you will trust me." Helena's throat tightened. Every instinct cried caution, yet within her chest a fragile hope flickered to life. "I am afraid," she admitted. His expression softened. "So am I. But fear cannot be allowed to decide your fate." Arthur reached for her hand, his touch warm against her chilled skin. "You have more allies than you know. If you will stand with me, we will face this together, before the entire court." Helena searched his eyes, seeking some proof of certainty. What she found there undid her remaining doubts. Strength, yes, but also something more. A fierce protectiveness that held no expectation, no demand. Only the offer of hope. "I will stand with you," she said, her voice steady. Arthur's shoulders eased, though the tension beneath them remained. "Then we must go." He led her from the chamber, Helena's fingers still entwined with his. The corridors of Northelm Court seemed to pulse with anticipation. Servants and courtiers glanced up as they passed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock as they saw who walked beside the prince. In the great audience hall, preparations for the ceremony were already underway. A gathering of nobles filled the chamber, men and women dressed in their finest, faces alive with the gleam of political intrigue. At the front of the hall stood Lord Farringdon, resplendent in black velvet and crimson silk, his powdered wig gleaming beneath the chandeliers. His pale gaze flicked toward Helena as she entered, narrowing with unmistakable fury. A murmur swept through the assembly as Prince Arthur led her forward, his posture unyielding. The king had not yet taken his place, but the court's attention was now fully fixed upon the pair. As they reached the center of the hall, Arthur released Helena's hand and stepped forward. "My lords and ladies," he began, voice clear and resonant, "I must speak before these proceedings continue." The murmurs deepened into an audible ripple of surprise. Farringdon's jaw tightened. "Your Highness, this is neither the time nor the place." "It is precisely the time and the place," Arthur countered, gaze hard as steel. "For a wrong is about to be committed beneath the guise of duty and alliance." The crowd stilled, the weight of his words drawing every gaze. Arthur turned to the assembly. "Lady Helena has been brought here against her will, coerced into a union she does not freely choose. Such a marriage would violate the very principles of justice upon which this court stands." Helena's breath trembled within her chest. She watched as Arthur faced the sea of expectant faces, his bearing noble and unflinching. "The crown cannot condone such an act," Arthur continued. "I will not remain silent while a woman of honor is forced into a life she does not choose." He extended his hand toward Helena. "Lady Helena, will you speak the truth of your own will?" The moment stretched. Every eye now turned to her. Helena drew in a breath, her heart thundering. Slowly, she stepped forward, her voice steady despite the maelstrom within. "I do not consent to this marriage," she said, each word deliberate. "I have not given my heart, nor my will to this union. I stand here now only because I have been given no choice." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Murmurs surged through the hall, some voices raised in outrage, others in dawning respect. Farringdon's face darkened with fury. "This is preposterous! The lady has been promised—" "A promise extracted through coercion is no promise at all," Arthur said sharply, "and it will not stand." The hall erupted into a chorus of debate, voices clashing in a rising storm of opinion. Allies of Farringdon shouted protests, while others, moved by Arthur's defense, called for justice. At that moment, the royal herald's voice cut through the din. His Majesty, King George I, enters. The hall fell into strained silence as the king took his place upon the throne, eyes narrowed with evident displeasure. He surveyed the scene before him, the lingering echoes of uproar still palpable. "Enough," the king commanded, his voice grave. "I will hear this matter fully before any further action is taken." Arthur bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I ask that the ceremony be postponed pending proper deliberation. The lady's rights must be respected." The king regarded him for a long moment. "Very well. The ceremony is hereby suspended. This matter will be addressed in private audience tomorrow morning." Another wave of murmurs swept through the hall. Farrington's expression twisted with barely restrained rage. Helena, standing beside Arthur, felt the trembling within her ease, replaced by a growing sense of gratitude, and something more. In the space of those few moments, he had become her champion before all. As the assembly began to disperse under the king's orders, the royal herald stepped forward once more. "By decree of His Majesty," he announced, voice ringing clear, "Prince Arthur and Lady Helena are summoned to appear before the king in private audience tomorrow morning to determine their fate." The morning light filtering through the high windows of Northelm Court was pallid, edged with silver mist. Helena stood in her chamber before a long mirror, her breath slow and measured as her maid fastened the last delicate pearl at the nape of her neck. Her gown, a simple yet elegant creation of soft blue silk, had been chosen with care. It bore no ostentatious embroidery, no weighty jewels, but shimmered subtly with each movement, a quiet assertion of her own will. Lady Ashcombe had not come that morning. Helena suspected Farrington had summoned her elsewhere, though whether to strategize or to fume, she could not guess. The absence felt like a small mercy. A soft knock sounded at the door. When the maid opened it, Arthur stood there in formal court attire, emerald velvet coat, ivory waistcoat, and the Order of the Garter across his chest. Yet beneath the polish of rank, there was no artifice in his expression, only unwavering resolve. "Lady Helena," he said gently, "are you ready?" She met his gaze and nodded. "I am." They walked together through the quiet corridors, their footfalls muted against ancient stone. Few words passed between them, none were needed. The time for persuasion had ended. What remained was truth alone. At the appointed hour, the royal herald announced them to the king's private audience chamber. The space, though smaller than the grand audience hall, possessed its own austere majesty. High-paneled walls enclosed them, and towering windows cast long shafts of light upon the marble floor. The king sat at the head of the room beneath a carved canopy, his expression impassive. Two royal advisers stood nearby, eyes sharp beneath powdered wigs. The weight of their scrutiny was palpable. Arthur and Helena advanced side by side, stopping several paces before the throne. Together they bowed. "Your Majesty," Arthur began, his voice calm and clear, "we appear before you today with respect and full awareness of the gravity of this matter." The king regarded them steadily. "Speak then, and speak plainly." Arthur's shoulders squared. "I do not deny that in opposing the intended union between Lady Helena and Lord Farrington, I have acted against the expectations of this court. Nor do I deny that my actions risk displeasing allies upon whom this crown has long relied." One of the advisers shifted slightly but said nothing. Arthur drew a breath, his gaze unwavering. "Yet I could not remain silent while an injustice was committed in your name. Lady Helena has been pressed into this betrothal through coercion, without the freedom to give or withhold her consent." He paused, his voice deepening with quiet conviction. "Furthermore, I confess openly before you and this council that my concern is not born of mere principle. I have come to hold Lady Helena in the highest regard, not only for her courage, but for the grace and dignity with which she has borne these trials." His next words fell into the still air like a solemn vow. "I care for her deeply, and I am prepared to face whatever consequences may follow for standing in her defense." Helena's heart swelled painfully. No rehearsal could have prepared her for the steady truth of those words. He had spoken them not as a prince, but as a man. The king's gaze shifted to her. "Lady Helena, is this your will as well?" Helena met his eyes without hesitation. Her voice was calm, her spine straight. "It is, Your Majesty. I cannot and will not consent to a marriage with Lord Farringdon. My words today are my own, freely given." The king leaned back, hands steepled before him. For a long moment, silence reigned in the chamber. "I am not blind to the weight of these matters," the king said at last. "Nor am I deaf to the murmurs within my court." He turned to confer in low tones with his advisers. The exchange was brief, but intense, their expressions shifting from caution to reluctant agreement. Finally, the king addressed them once more. "Lord Farringdon's influence has waned among those whose counsel I most value. The manner in which this betrothal was arranged brings no honor to this court. I will not see it sanctioned." Relief swept through Helena so swiftly she nearly faltered. "The betrothal," the king continued, voice resolute, "is annulled on the grounds of coercion." Arthur inclined his head deeply. "We are most grateful, Your Majesty." The king's gaze held a flicker of dry amusement. "As for you, nephew, your candor serves you well this day. You may, with my tacit approval, court Lady Helena openly, but I trust you will proceed with propriety." Arthur bowed again. "You have my word." Helena dipped into a deep curtsy. "And mine, Your Majesty." The king dismissed them with a wave of his hand. As they turned to depart, Helena's knees threatened to weaken beneath her, but Arthur's steady presence at her side lent her strength. The news spread swiftly through the court. At first, scandal dominated every whispered conversation. How the prince had defied convention. How Lady Helena had dared refuse a marquis. But with each passing day, as courtiers observed the quiet sincerity between them, no grand displays, no triumphal airs, admiration began to seep into the discourse. One afternoon, as they walked through the gardens once more, Arthur glanced down at Helena with a faint smile. "It seems we have become a tale for the ballads." She returned the smile, her heart light. "Then let them sing what they will." Weeks passed in a tender unfolding of courtship. Arthur's visits were frequent, but never ostentatious. He sought Helena's company in quiet moments, during walks beneath shaded arbors, at small gatherings where the eyes of the court could do little harm. Each meeting deepened the bond between them, forged now not only by circumstance but by choice. When at last Arthur approached the king with a formal request for her hand, no opposition remained strong enough to deny it. On the morning of their wedding, the royal chapel stood bathed in soft light. No grand procession heralded the occasion. The ceremony was to be simple, a reflection of their own wishes. Helena dressed without the burden of expectation. Her gown, chosen entirely by her, was of soft ivory silk with delicate embroidery along the hem. No heavy jewels weighed her down. A single strand of pearls graced her throat. Her hair, loosely gathered, allowed a few soft curls to frame her face. As the chapel filled with select guests, those few whose loyalty and affection had weathered the storm, Helena stood at the threshold, her heart both calm and wild. Arthur awaited her at the altar, his emerald coat gleaming beneath the light streaming through the stained glass windows. His gaze met hers as she began her walk down the aisle, each step a quiet triumph. When she reached his side, he took her hands in his. No words were needed between them. The ceremony unfolded with gentle solemnity, each vow spoken with clear, unwavering devotion. As the final benediction was given, the chapel doors swung open. Together, Arthur and Helena emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, the warmth of the day embracing them as they stepped forward, hand in hand, toward the life they had claimed through courage, dignity, and love. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.